At long last, we have some great stories out of Canada, some real and genuine political victories to talk about. A lot of Canadian Conservatives have been watching all of the budget slashing in the United States with some measure of envy. It looks like the American Conservatives actually have the ability to begin slashing a lot of funding, going to a lot of very ludicrous things. Well, that's actually, believe it or not, happening in Canada right now. And I'll admit that when this story came out, I first double-checked it and then I triple-checked it because it's incredibly surprising. But of the stories that we're going to review over the next 20 minutes or so, the first one is that for, I think, the first time in a decade, the Trudeau government is turning down funding to major abortion groups. Groups have said that funding they've been previously approved for is being removed. So let's walk through this story because, again, this is kind of like seeing a white elephant in Trudeau land. This is not the sort of thing we have come to expect from that government. So Abortion Care Canada, which was formerly known as National Abortion Federation Canada, is a national group that seeks to connect Canadians who want abortion services to abortion services. And they, of course, also advertise for that. And they claim that they may actually have to shut down entirely, which is great news, after Health Canada turned down their request for a renewal of annual funding. According to CTV, Abortion Care Canada has received around $2.2 million since they established their abortion fund in 2021, and ACC asked for another $1.3 million for the upcoming fiscal year from Trudeau's Sexual and Reproductive Health Fund, but was denied. Now, what's important to note here is that unlike other grassroots organizations, most progressive groups rely on Canada's government for their funding because the sexual revolution in Canada was primarily a government-funded entity. So if you're a Canadian pro-life group or you're a crisis pregnancy center seeking to help struggling women with the resources that they need, you're going to have to go to donors, you're going to have to fundraise in churches, you're going to have to find some way to fund your own services. But if you're an abortion group, you just connect yourself happily to the government teat and taxpayer cash consistently flows your way. And so when a group like this finds out from the federal government that they might not get government funding, this is devastating because basically the government is their only source of cash. That is to say, we, the taxpayer, are their only source of cash. And there was actually a fund launched in 2021 for the explicit purpose of just funding abortion groups. It was called the Sexual and Reproductive Health Fund. And it was launched with $45 million in the kitty to promote, again, abortion access across Canada. And the Liberal budget last fall, which we've talked about on previous episodes of the briefing, promised another $90 million over the next 6 years and committed to make this fund a permanent government fund. So abortion's legal in Canada throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. Every one of those abortions is funded by the taxpayer. Even if you want a very late-term abortion and can't find a medical professional willing to do it in your province or in your geographical area, the government will use taxpayer funding to fly you to a late-term abortionist in the United States to do that abortion for you. All of that isn't enough. They also established a separate fund with a starting amount of $45 million, and we're going to give it another $90 million to try and promote abortion even further. And so that just gives you an idea of what the Trudeau government has been all about. Now, these groups are really, really concerned because Parliament has prorogued, which means the Trudeau budget is probably just going to be scrapped, and the political landscape is changing. So Mark Carney right now is ahead in the Liberal leadership race. People aren't quite sure what his progressive commitments may or may not be yet. And so abortion groups are suddenly realizing that a world without Trudeau might mean that their entire organizations simply collapse due to the fact that they're not getting paid out of taxpayer funds by a man who was in lockstep with their agenda. ACC Executive Director T.K. Pritchard told media outlets that the government funded 77% of the group's operations, which included helping 450 Canadians procure abortions. According to Pritchard, among their clients were, quote, newcomers, racialized and LGBTQ clients, and those living outside of city centers. And they were using the taxpayer money to pay for flights, for transportation, and hotels to bring those people to abortion clinics willing to perform whatever terminations they were seeking. Now, in lieu of taxpayer funding, ACC is now attempting to fundraise the money, which they're going to have trouble doing because they've never had to do so before, or shut down. As Pritchard said, quote, "The reality is that unless something big changes, we will likely close." Stop with all of the good news. "The organization will shut down. We have 4 to 6 months of funding that I can kind of piece together." Now, Health Canada responded to press questions by stating that there just isn't enough money to distribute to all the groups who applied for money, and that ultimately ACC did not qualify. Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, which CTV described as an amalgamation of several groups that promote sexual and reproductive rights, including the Planned Parenthood Federation of Canada, saw their taxpayer funding slashed by almost 40%. And this is just a great detail. This is kind of this kind of story I wish I could have shared with you all over Christmas. The groups didn't find out that their taxpayer funding was cut or denied until December, and now they're totally scrambling for cash. So basically, they just assumed that we're going to get a ton of Canadian money that they were going to be able to use for the next fiscal year, and they didn't find out till the very, very end that this wasn't actually going to happen this time around. Now, the groups claim that the demand for abortion has risen steeply over the past several years, and that many people, if they shut down, will not be able to access abortions as a result. Again, this is one of those stories that really doesn't have a downside. This is unequivocal and very unexpected good news because the Trudeau government has consistently prioritized abortion at the top of its list, both in rhetoric and in funding. As we discussed in a previous episode, Trudeau is willing to risk a tariff war with Donald Trump just to take a couple of shots at him in a speech to a pro-abortion feminist group. Now, Canada's taxpayer-funded abortion activists are warning that if incoming governments don't prioritize feticide like Trudeau did, their services may collapse. Action Canada, to give you an idea of what they're up to, said they facilitated 100 abortions in 2021 and then another 600 in 2024 between January and November. And Action Canada's director, Frédéric Chabot, told CTV, "The fact that we're going to lose funding when we were already under massive pressure in terms of demand means that a lot of people will be denied moving forward," which, again, you have to be a certain kind of person to think that let's look at their numbers for a minute, another 700 Canadian babies is a real tragedy, isn't it? We definitely need to give them taxpayer money to ensure there are less babies. And one of the things that I think is important to note here is, why does nobody ever ask the fundamental question, why should the government be funding and facilitating the destruction of children in the womb? Now, even if you're pro-choice, hear me out. Even if one believes that this is a right, and I most certainly do not, what possible incentive is there to ensure that fewer babies are born in a country that has already plunged over the demographic cliff? This is something reported on by almost every single major Canadian news outlet over the last several years, including the Globe and Mail and the National Post, is Canada's birth rate has completely cratered. And one of the reasons for that is that life is becoming so affordable, that financial situations are getting tighter and tighter across Canada, which is why you also have millions of Canadians using food banks. And again, as I mentioned in a previous episode of the briefing, even Joyce Arthur of the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada has admitted that many women, due to financial pressures, are having abortions because they, quote, feel like they have no other choice. And so maybe if we're going to be fire hosing money around, we should be giving women money so that they can keep the babies they say they do not want to abort, instead of giving money to these vultures so that they can actually give those women a ride to the abortion clinic or a flight to a place where their abortion can get done, instead of maybe giving them the kind of financial security that they need to have the children they say they want. Even if you're a pro-choice, a viewer, you should agree that unwanted abortion is an incredible tragedy. And so this is something that I think we should have been looking at a very long time ago. Maybe our government should focus its efforts on preventing unwanted abortions instead of instinctively assuming, for ideological reasons, that there are only unwanted babies. Many women in Canada feel desperate. Many women in Canada really need our help, but instead, the Trudeau government has been attacking crisis pregnancy centers and funding abortion funds. But now, as it turns out, there just doesn't seem to be enough money for all of the abortion groups and the progressive causes that are asking for it. I'm not sure why suddenly the Trudeau government is not giving funds or is slashing the funds to major abortion groups, because it's extremely out of character. But nonetheless, it's great news. And If you want evidence that it's great news, the abortion groups say that if we don't give them more money, there will be more Canadian babies next year. And I don't know how we're going to cope with that tragedy. Another interesting story for those who have been following the kind of woke flag wars that have swept Canada over the past several years. It's published by CTV on January 22, and this is the kind of story that shouldn't be significant, but unfortunately is. Because as we've talked about in past episodes, one of the ways that LGBT activists bully small Canadian towns, Christian schools, Catholic schools, is they try to get their flag hoisted, either the trans flag or the LGBT pride flag, and when their request is declined, they insist that this is a form of persecution, because apparently not proactively flying the flag of their ideology constitutes persecution, which gives you an idea of the kind of hubris and entitlement that we're dealing with. It's something we like to call cry bullying, which is you cry about something, but you're using your tears and your alleged victimhood as a weapon against the intended target of your cry bullying, which in this case is the Dufferin-Peel Catholic District School Board, which just reaffirmed their policy that prohibits the pride flag from being flown at their schools. Now, think about how insane things had to get in Canada for it to be controversial for a Catholic school not to fly a pride flag. Regardless of whether or not you're Catholic, the Catholic Church's catechism is pretty clear on this stuff. And the idea that somebody could be offended that a Catholic school isn't proactively rebutting their own doctrine by flying a flag that is in contradiction to that doctrine just gives you an idea of how aggressively colonial the ideological aims of the LGBT movement are. So let me quote directly from CTV, because the Canadian media is always a joy to read on such subjects. During Tuesday night's committee meeting, trustees voted against a motion introduced by Trustee Bria Corbett to revise the board's flag police. It says police. I think they meant policy, but that's really funny. Trustee Bria Corbett to revise the board's flag police to allow the pride flag. This is a wonderful Freudian slip here by CTV. And other flags to be flown at facilities that have 3 flagpoles. In the meeting, she said the board's current flag policy has caused significant harm. When we remove rainbow flags or other heritage flags, we're not protecting Catholic identity. We're revealing institutional fragility. The rainbow flag doesn't threaten Catholic education. Policies of exclusion do, and exclusion is a strong form of bullying. As I've noted before, whenever they start talking about inclusion, you know that Christian beliefs are just about to be excluded. And so this is, again, notice the cry bullying here, is that not flying a pride flag has caused significant harm. 5 historical minutes ago, LGBT activists claimed that they just wanted to be recognized like everybody else. They just wanted to redefine marriage. Nothing was going to happen. Who could it possibly hurt? We're not pushing it on you. Now it causes significant harm to not fly their flag in front of a Catholic school. And they say the rainbow flag doesn't threaten Catholic education. No, but the people advocating for it sure do, including Ms. Corbett here. She's definitely a threat to Catholic education because she wants to fly a symbol directly at odds with a traditional Catholic education on the flagpole in front of the building where the education is starting to take place. So here, let's read more from her because she is a gem. We have students, families, and staff who are Catholic and identify as 2S LGBTQIA+. There's always that little sinister plus at the end. We must protect them. We've heard tonight that they experience increasing levels of bullying, harassment, and mental health concerns. Prohibiting these flags from flying outside the board office and removing them from inside schools after an observance period does not make school environments more welcoming, safer, more inclusive. It doesn't. And then there's a 1-sentence paragraph. Her motion was defeated. It's rare that such cry bullying isn't effective, but notice how many onion layers of garbage there are here. The idea that flying a flag outside the board building, so the Catholic school board, noting their loyalty not to the Catholic Church's doctrine, but instead to a totally different ideology, fundamentally at odds with the Catholic Church, this is also apparently going to decrease bullying. The way to decrease bullying is just punish the bullies. If there's real bullying going on here, then they should be suspended or they should get detentions, or if the bullying is really severe, kick them out of school. Bullying is unacceptable in any context towards anybody for any reason because bullying is cruel and wrong. But I suspect here, reading into her view of 2S LGBTQIA+, that what she means by bullying is people who just don't agree that 2S LGBTQIA+ is a real thing or a real community. And that this ever-growing acronym with all of these different layers of identity is actually at odds with the Christian view of the human person, which is that people are created male or female and they're ordered to a specific purpose. And so that, I think, she would actually quantify as bullying as well, which changes things. And the paragraph after the motion was defeated paragraph is Trustee Paula D'Ameto Giovanozzi, clearly Italian, said she's unapologetically Catholic and the cross is the only symbol that should be promoted by a Christian. The LGBTQ plus community, she left off like three. She left off a whole bunch of letters, so clearly a bigot, is not our enemy. We all fall short of God's glory. We are not judging, but we are also not promoting. We don't want to outwardly promote because our faith doesn't allow us to. We are called to love people whatever their beliefs are. We are not discriminating against anyone. A Catholic school board should not promote any political or cultural beliefs that are not biblical. Everyone has the free will to choose, but we don't have the free will to alter the teachings of the Bible or the Catechism. How hard was that? That's exactly right. It's an incredibly logical position to take. I would agree with about 90% of that, even though I am not myself a Catholic. And it's just interesting to see that it's always the Catholic or Protestant schools that are targeted with this stuff. I haven't heard of a lot of Islamic madrasas, for example, or Muslim day schools that are being told they need to fly the pride flag, that are being told that they're not sufficiently Canadian, that they're bullying, that they're leveling significant harassment at people for not doing this. And so this is a good news story because we've seen a couple of these stories now where people across Canada are saying, we're done with this. You're not being bullied just because we won't proactively fly your own flag. We're not bullying you at all. In fact, we think you are worthy of inherent respect and dignity because you are a human being created in the image of God. But that doesn't mean we need to climb on board an identity that didn't even exist in Canadian law a couple of years ago. It doesn't mean we need to endorse every behavior you engage in. And it certainly means we do not have to constantly cave to your cry bullying when that's very obviously what it was. And so that's another little good news story. Whenever you see people standing up against bullies, it's good news, and that news is worth mentioning and celebrating. The third story we're going to go over, again, is another good news story. Very rare that there's this much good news on the Canadian social front, and I'm going to read directly from the National Post article because the person in question here is actually somebody that I've known for many years. I've been connected to her through pro-life circles. And the way that the National Post, a national newspaper, covered the story was shockingly honest. And let me read their headline from January 29. Rape survivor reaches settlement with TMU student union after she was barred from event over anti-abortion activism. Now that is kind of a barn burner title. And the case is kind of crazy and gives you an idea of the extent to which progressive Canadians advocate values, but again show a lack of compassion. So I want to read directly from the Post report here. A rape victim who was turned away from an event for sexual assault survivors at Toronto Metropolitan University due to her anti-abortion activism has reached settlements with the school and its student union. I want to thank all the individuals who supported me and my family throughout the years through your encouragement, financial support, and your prayers, the student Talia Battista said in a statement. As part of the settlement, the Toronto Metropolitan Student Union will repeal a controversial guideline, Operational Policy Number 28, which sounds so sinister, that excluded anti-abortion students from accessing campus resources. Think about that for a minute. So they actually had, the student union here had a policy, Operational Policy Number 28, that explicitly disallowed students with pro-life views from accessing campus resources that are supposed to be available to all students. So here's a kind of summary of how this case played out. In February 2017, Talia Battista, a second-year business student at then-Ryerson University, we changed the name because Ryerson was a very bad man apparently, tried to attend a self-healing through yoga event on campus for sexual assault survivors. Before she moved to Toronto for university while she was attending high school in Antigua, Battista says she was in an abusive relationship when her partner allegedly raped her. When she approached the then-Ryerson Student Union to inquire about the program, she was barred from attending because of her work with Toronto Against Abortion, a pro-life group on campus. In August 2017, Battista filed a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, arguing that she was a victim of discrimination based on her religious beliefs. The policy says, No TMSU resources, space, recognition, or funding will be allocated to enhance groups or individuals whose primary or sole purpose is anti-choice activities. Such activities are defined as any campaigns, actions, distributions, solicitations, or lobbying efforts that seek to limit an individual's right to choose what they can or cannot do with their own body. The guideline will now be replaced with a new issues policy that reflects TMSU's strong commitment to remaining a pro-choice students' union. According to the agreements, the details of the settlement must remain confidential, but some information, such as the policy change, can be made public. The student union also pledged to conduct human rights trainings for all TMSU employees, staff, and board members, including instruction on discrimination on the basis of creed and the interface between creed and an individual's pro-life beliefs. The student union did not respond to the Post's request for comment, and the university also declined to comment. Now, anybody who has worked with a pro-life club on campus knows that student unions are the worst because the politics seem very low stakes, which means that everybody who is part of one of these student unions thinks they're Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King if the people in question were truly terrible people who believed in limiting people's rights in order to put forward a specific ideology. And pro-life groups are a constant target of student unions to the point where attempts by universities and student unions from between about 2006 to 2014 to crack down on pro-life clubs, to take away their right to free speech, to take away their right to operate on campus, to remove their club status, actually triggered a backlash of pro-life students standing up against their universities and ending up in the pro-life movement as a result. So a few more details here of TMSU. They denied that they discriminated against Ms. Battista or otherwise violated her human rights and admitted no liability in relation to Ms. Battista's allegations in the application and deny such liability. Battista refrained from commenting to the Post, citing the confidentiality of the settlement, except to say that she had filed 2 separate complaints against the student union and university, and they were resolved through separate independent settlement agreements. One of the reasons we couldn't do this segment as an interview, of course, is because all the parties involved are kind of bound by confidentiality agreements. The article kind of goes on to point out that pro-lifers are actually harassed on campus for doing pro-life outreach. And it's also, I want to make a side note, I think it's pretty disgusting that these student unions, which, by the way, are funded through fees that get kind of garnished from the tuition paid by students, hold specifically ideological views regardless of what the students paying those fees might think. But this change in policy is a big deal. And the fact that a settlement was reached with with Talia, who again is a rape survivor, but was discriminated against just because she believes that children in the womb should have human rights. Another aspect of this story that I think is important is it once again exposes what progressive activists in Canada are like. And this case has really revealed their cruelty, their meanness, and their small-mindedness when confronted with issues where they disagree. And so that kind of wraps up today's Bridgehead briefing. I hope you were encouraged by some of this news. You have major abortion groups either being denied funding or having their funds slashed by up to 40%. You have some people using their voice and actually displaying courage and refusing to bow to bullies and to ideologues, which again, even if you are pro most of what the LGBT movement stands for, I think we can agree that people should be able to express their beliefs and defend their beliefs in public without getting bullied by cry bullies, insisting on everybody speaking exactly what they believe and walking in lockstep with their own agenda. And then again, this story of Talia Battista, who really did some heroic things here by choosing, despite her own personal pain and the things she'd been through, to push this case forward, to insist that she not be discriminated against, and to hold those who had discriminated against her to account. Thanks so much for watching this episode of the Bridgehead Briefing. Please leave a comment below if you have anything to say about this episode. You can subscribe to this channel. That would help us out, or like this video. And of course, if you found the content helpful, please do share it around.